Welcome to Life After the Family Home, smart conversations about downsizing and planning the next chapter. I'm Skip Benton with Coldwell Bankers Select Real Estate in Northern Nevada. Today, I want to talk about a situation that may sound very familiar. A husband and wife are in their late 60s and they live in a 5-bedroom house. The children are gone. They do not use the upstairs anymore. The yard is becoming physically difficult. They have been talking about downsizing for almost 3 years. They started decluttering last spring. They have watched probably 30 different videos about downsizing. They are still there, still overwhelmed, still frustrated, still asking the same question. Where do we start? That is a very real situation, and I have seen versions of it many times. Homeowners often know the house is too much long before they are ready to make a move. They feel it when they avoid the stairs. They feel it when the yard becomes painful. They feel it when several bedrooms sit empty. They feel it when another repair comes up. And they feel it when they look around at decades of belongings and think, there is no way we can deal with all of this. The first thing I want to say is this. You are not stuck because you have not watched enough videos. You are not stuck because you are lazy. And you are not stuck because you do not understand the basic idea of downsizing. You are stuck because this is not really one decision. It is hundreds of decisions tied together. The house, the next home, the yard, the stairs, the furniture, the tools, the family memories, the finances, the timing, the fear of making a mistake. And when all of those decisions pile up at once, the brain does something very normal. It freezes. That is why more information does not always create more progress. Sometimes more information just creates more pressure. You watch one video that tells you to declutter first. Another says to choose the next home first. Another says to sell before you buy. Another says never sell before you know where you are going. Then someone tells you to keep only what brings joy. And suddenly you are standing in the garage, arguing over a socket set. That is not a failure. It is a sign that the process needs structure. Having an argument over the tools is a good example. On the surface, it looks like the problem is the tool collection. But it probably is not only about tools. The tools may represent years of work, projects completed, independence, skill, capability. A garage or workshop may be one of the last places in the house that still feels completely personal. So when one spouse says, we need to get rid of all these tools, the other may hear, the part of your life that mattered no longer matters. That may not be what was intended, but it may be what was felt. That is why pushing harder usually does not help. The goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to get unstuck. And the best way to do that is to stop treating downsizing as one giant project. You need to separate it into 3 different decisions. The first decision is about the house. The second decision is about the next lifestyle. The third decision is about the belongings. Those decisions are connected, but they do not need to be solved in the same order or on the same day. A lot of homeowners believe they must completely declutter before they can even begin thinking seriously about moving. That belief keeps people stuck for years, because suddenly every drawer becomes a requirement, every closet becomes a roadblock, every disagreement becomes proof that the move is impossible. But you do not have to finish decluttering before you start planning. In fact, planning the next chapter often makes decluttering easier. Before deciding what to get rid of, start by deciding what kind of life you want. Do you want one-story living, less yard work, lower utility bills, a smaller garage, a home closer to family, a low-maintenance community, room for guests, but not 5 bedrooms, a lock-and-leave lifestyle, a little more travel, a little less responsibility? Those questions matter, because once you begin to picture the next home, your belongings have context. Without that context, every item feels uncertain. Maybe we will need this. Maybe there will be room. Maybe the next house will have a large garage. Maybe the kids will want this someday. Uncertainty keeps everything in place. Clarity helps things move. So the first step is not getting rid of the tools. The first step is getting clear about what the next chapter should look like. Sit down together, away from the garage, away from the closets, and away from the boxes. Do not talk about what to discard. Talk about what you want life to feel like. What are you tired of? What do you want less of? What do you want more of? What would make daily life easier? What part of the current house is no longer serving you? The yard, the stairs, the repairs, the unused rooms, the cost, the upkeep? Then ask another question. What do we absolutely want in the next home? Maybe the husband still wants a workspace. That is important. Maybe he does not need every tool, but perhaps he does need a smaller garage, a workbench, and enough space to keep the tools he truly uses. That is a very different conversation from saying the tools have to go. It changes the question from elimination to right sizing. And that is what downsizing should be, not stripping life down to nothing, right sizing it for the next chapter. Once you have a general picture of what the next home should look like, the next step is to learn what your options actually are. What could your current home sell for? What would you likely net after the sale? What types of smaller homes are available? What would those homes cost? Would you be buying with cash? Would there be a smaller mortgage? Would a condo, townhome, manufactured home, or smaller single-story house make sense? Would staying in the same area matter? Would moving closer to family matter more? This is where a real estate conversation becomes useful. Not because you are committing to sell, not because the sign is going in the yard tomorrow, but because vague ideas create anxiety. Real numbers create clarity. You may discover that the move is more possible than you thought, or you may discover that staying and making changes makes more sense for now. Either way, you are no longer guessing. Then you can return to the belongings with a better framework. And when you do not begin with the tools. Do not begin with photographs. Do not begin with heirlooms. Do not begin with the most emotionally loaded category in the house. Start with what is easy. Expired items, duplicates, broken items, things nobody uses, extra linens, old paperwork, unused kitchen items, clothing that no longer fits or is never worn. The goal at the beginning is not major progress. The goal is momentum. You want a few easy decisions, a few visible results, a few areas that feel lighter. That creates confidence, and confidence makes the harder decisions easier later. It also helps to create a temporary category called Not Yet. That does not mean everything goes into that pile, but it gives you a pressure release valve. Some decisions do not need to be made today. Maybe the tools are a Not Yet category. That is fine. You can still make progress in 10 other areas. You do not need complete agreement on every item before moving forward. That is another place couples get stuck. They believe one disagreement stops the whole process. It does not. You can pause one category and continue with another. The goal is not perfect agreement. The goal is steady progress. It also helps to set rules around shared belongings. If something belongs primarily to one spouse, that person should have more control over the decision. That does not mean unlimited space. It means respect. Maybe each spouse gets a defined amount of space in the next home. One closet, one shelving unit, one part of the garage, one keepsake cabinet. Then each person chooses what fits within that space. That is much more productive than one person deciding what the other person should value. It turns the conversation into boundaries instead of judgment. Another useful rule is to stop measuring progress only by what leaves the house. Progress can also mean you agreed on the type of home you want. You learned what the current house may be worth. You visited a few possible communities. You discussed the garage without arguing. You completed one closet. You made a list of family items. You scheduled a donation pickup. Those are all real steps, and they matter, because downsizing usually does not happen in one dramatic moment. It happens through a series of smaller decisions that begin creating movement. The most important thing is to stop waiting until you feel completely ready. Most people do not feel completely ready. They begin with uncertainty. They move forward anyway, and clarity grows through the process. So if you are in this situation right now, if the house has been too much for years, the children are gone, the stairs are unused, the yard is hurting your back, and the belongings are keeping you frozen, here is where I would start. First, stop decluttering for a moment. Second, sit down together and describe the life you want next. Identify the features the next home must have. Fourth, learn the realistic value of your current home and the cost of your alternatives. Fifth, Restart decluttering with the easiest categories, and leave the tool collection alone for now. You can come back to it when the future is clearer and the conversation is calmer. Because the problem is not that you have failed to downsize. The problem is that you have been trying to solve everything at once. You do not need to solve everything today. You only need to identify the next clear step. Then take it. That is how people get unstuck. Not through more pressure, not through another 30 videos, through clarity, structure, and one manageable decision at a time. Thank you for joining this conversation on Life After the Family Home, smart conversations about downsizing and planning the next chapter. I'm Skip Benton with Coldwell Bankers Select Real Estate in Northern Nevada.